In this video, we're going to be taking a look at cascading style sheets. In particular, we're going to be working with external style sheets. We'll also take a look at what is meant by cascading, and we'll complete the video with a discussion about property values. Let's get started with external style sheets. When you develop your CSS, you'll use a text editor or a program like Simple CSS. My strategy has been to use a text editor to actually enter the code, but use something like Simple CSS to explore the various options that CSS makes available to me. You must use a file name using the format filename.css. Something like styles.css is typical. A style sheet can hold any number of rules, which means that you don't need more than one. In the past, the practice was to have different styles for different uses, but I think currently the best practice is to have one style sheet and put all of your styles in the style sheet, and you can use comments to delineate various sections of the style sheet. Style sheets are made available to the website through a link on each web page. So every page that you create, if you want the styles to come through to the browser, you have to create a link in the head of your document. And this is what this link looks like. In the boilerplate that I've provided, it already has a link to a style sheet called styles.css, which is located in a subdirectory called CSS. So let's take a look at our file, styles.css. You've seen this before, but I'll try to explain how these styles actually work. Let's take a look at the first style here. This is a style for the heading 1 element, and I've indicated that the font size is 170%. Let's look at this in more detail. The first thing we have is the element name. The elements that are pre-named, like H1, P, the emphasis element, these are all available to be styled. And all you have to do is just declare the element name at the beginning of your style, leave a space, and start your style definition with a curly bracket. The style is placed by naming the attribute with a colon, and then the numerical aspect, or if it could be non-numerical, it could be small or the word red, and then end that particular definition with a semicolon. And this is very, very important. If you don't include a semicolon, it's possible that the style will not work. The semicolon will separate different property values. In this case, I only have one, but I still need the semicolon. And then you'll end the definition of the style with a curly bracket. Let's take a look at our index.html. I currently have in the body hello world, which is enclosed by the H1 element. Let's take a look and first save it and then view it. This is what the hello world looks with the H1 element. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, put it over here. And we'll play a little bit. Let's go back into our styles. Now this definition, style definition, has just one property value. Let's try adding another property value. Let's add color, red, end with a semicolon. Save it. And then we'll view our page again. Now, I haven't changed the HTML. I've only changed the style of H1. So let's try this and see. Yes, it's changed the style of that text to red. As I mentioned a minute ago, you can add comments. And comments in CSS are different than comments in HTML. To do a comment, you do a slash and then a star. Put in your text. And then to close the comment, you do the opposite, in the opposite order, star, slash. We'll save that. We'll just make sure that it still works, and it does. Another thing I should add here is that these are all predefined elements, but I can create my own styles, and there are two different types of styles. There's an ID and a class. The type of style that's an ID is defined by putting this pound symbol in front of it. So I can create my own style name, call it style, and then place my property values inside the curly brackets. And this is known as an ID. The other kind of style is a class, and the class is defined by the dot with the style name. So we'll say class style. Now the difference between the two, an ID style is something that is to be used only once on a page, and a class style can be used multiple times. So an example of an ID style would be if you want to create a style for a particular section of a page, and that section, there's only one section of that type on that page, you define it as an ID or an identifier. And if you have something which is repeated throughout the page, then you use the class style. Before we go more fully into cascading style sheets, I'd like to show you this website. This is called Zen Garden. And the idea behind this is that it makes it possible for users to submit their own style sheets for this standard page, and through the menus you can take a look at the different styles that people have applied to this content. Now the content doesn't change, only the cascading style sheets. So if I choose Under the Sea by Eric Stoltz, it's the same content, but it looks completely different. Even the menus are the same, but the style of the menus are different. Orchid Beauty. The content doesn't change, it's just the presentation which changes. Kyoto Forest. So with style sheets, the important thing to note is that the content is separate from the presentation. And the power of that is really in later on, once you have to maintain a website. If you want to change, say, the size of the font, you can do it with one change in one style sheet, and it will change the size of the font in all of the web pages that use that style sheet. So you can very, very, very quickly make changes to the presentation without disturbing the content. And that's really the power of separating presentation from content. So let's go a little bit deeper into CSS. What if two different style rules apply to the same element? Well, CSS uses the concepts of inheritance, specificity, and location to determine which rule wins. So in this case, I have text under a paragraph element, and that is here. We can define it as red, save it, and it's red. Some of this text is in the M element, the emphasis, and let's see if we can look at that a little bit bigger. Here it is here. If P is colored red and M does not have a specific color rule, then all instances of M will appear red if they are within the P selectors. So let's take a look at our index, and we see the P selector here, and M is here. And because we haven't done anything to M to define that as a different color, it will remain unchanged as long as it's within the P element, which is defined as red. But let's try making a new definition. And see what happens. So now the definition M, which previously inherited the color from P, because I've now made a specific, here's our specificity, our specific color being blue, within the P tag, it's now blue. So we've got an overriding effect. If specificity is not enough, then the location of rule will break the tie. Specific rules which are applied internally to the document, for example, if I were to institute an inline style, which we'll get to later by doing this, then this will override my definition in my external style sheet. So I have several ways that I can tweak the styles in order to get the effect I want. And as you go, you'll get a better sense of how to manipulate styles to get the look that you want. So let's now take a look a little bit more closely at property values. So I can have a property value for H1 and call it border none. Let's separate these a little bit more with spaces. Now this property value, border none, this is a predefined value or preset value. I could replace this with something like 5px, and that would be a value. It's a length. It's 5 pixels. The font size is a percentage, and I could set the font size at 40px, which would be correct, but best practice is that we don't define absolute values for font sizes because we want the web page to be responsive to the size of the monitor or the display device. So if we use percentages, we can set the percentage relative to the size of the monitor. If we set an absolute value, we are getting into unknown territory in terms of making it responsive. So this is why we use percentages for things like font sizes. You can have line height. So I'll change or add a property value called line height, and call it 1.5. And that's a number. So I've got percentages, pixels, I've just got a number here. Let's take a look and see how that line height property has affected the paragraph. It's increased the line spacing a little bit, and I can increase that even more, say 2, and it's increased it even more. If I say unchanged, this isn't a value, it just allows us to retain the default line height that was set in the browser. Regarding color, I can use any one of 16 predefined names. So I've got things like aqua, black, blue, gray, green, purple, red, white, yellow, and I can just use the names. Or I can choose a hexadecimal value, and the way we would do that is something like this: pound, let's go 60cc3F, and these are hexadecimal values, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. And each of these hexadecimal pairs relates to a different color value. So this is the R value, the red value, the green value, and the blue value. So let's see what H1 then looks like with that color specified. It's a kind of a green. Now, a few seconds ago, I referred to an inline style. And let's go and take a look at this more closely. So I've defined M as being blue. But I'm going to create, for this particular instance of M, I can say, I don't want it to be blue, I want it to be yellow. So to do an inline style, you say style equals, and in quotes, you put in your property values. So in this case, I'll put in color, colon, yellow. Save that and view it. And now that text is in yellow. So you use inline styles if you want to change the style of a particular element in that one place, in that one instance in the code. This is not to be encouraged. You shouldn't do this as kind of your default. You should try to put everything into the external style sheet and try to work as generally and globally as possible. And then for places where you need to specify exceptions to those rules, that's when you use inline. So to close, I encourage you to open up Simple CSS and experiment with the different property values that are available in the context of a very, very simple website like this. Experiment with what you can do to change the appearance of things like p tags and h1 elements, and just play for a few hours.